Hello. Today in my storytelling playlist, I'm going to talk about why I don't trust gurus. And I'm also going to talk about a few that I've met. So the other night, I was watching this film called Holy Hell. I recommend it if you haven't seen it. But it's about a cult and the members that got out of the cult and them talking about the cult leader. And it just got me to thinking about the gurus that I've run into in my life. Gurus are expert manipulators, not mystics, in my opinion. Many of them are skilled in more psychological manipulation, and like in the case of this film I was watching, the cult leader in that was a trained actor. He even was in some films and some porn films. It was just a big act, and I don't think that's what mystics are like. I think for mystics it's a struggle, not an act. So there's definitely a big difference between the two. But in the case of the guru, they are a middleman for the divine. Most of them are grifters, I'd say. They claim you can only get spiritual enlightenment through them. There's often a power imbalance, promise of something, speaking in riddles that are just vague enough to seem profound. Their charisma becomes a kind of currency, and obviously it's all about a cult of personality. It's aesthetics without substance. They say things like, "You're not ready for the teaching yet. I'll get back to you when I think you're ready," as if they are the arbitrator of what is best for you. It's a kind of spiritual gaslighting, I'd say. So over the years, I've met countless New Age gurus. I think that the guru and the mystic are drawing from the same well to some degree, so you will run into them more than you probably would if you were not interested in mysticism. So from my time at esoteric bookstores or meditation groups or even some of the students at my college, I've run into many. I'm going to go through and mention a few of those instances, then I'll get deeper into my other interactions. So the first thing that comes to mind is this idea of like witch feminists. I've met a few of these. Now, I'm not saying that if you're a Wiccan or, you're into that kind of thing that you are, a false prophet or a guru. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is the ones that I've met were this certain kind of type. It's kind of a pop mysticism. They're quoting from books that I would just be like, oh my God, what are you talking about? They're the kind of books that I avoid at the bookstore. I'm not exactly sure how to put that, but, I usually know when I see it, I'm like, oh, this is not my thing. And those are usually the books that they're quoting from. There was this one lady that I knew through a friend who was an older woman, and she was a feminist studies professor. And when I met her, I could tell instantly that we were like enemies. I mean, I don't like to have enemies, but sometimes it just naturally happens. Stuff that she would say, I would correct her on it because a lot of her stuff was kind of loosey-goosey. It was not, factually correct. And I don't like when people talk out of their ass, so I would comment and say like, well, that's not really right. But, she was very passive aggressive to me, partly because I was a man, I think. I think she was just misandrist. If I was not into mysticism, she probably would have just dismissed me as just this man. But because I was also into things that she was kind of into, it made more struggle between the two of us. The mutual friend I had, I didn't really want to disrupt our friendship, but I felt like when I would go there, I would just run into this woman. I just could not take her. I was calm, and I didn't really cause any kind of, arguments or anything, but the whole time, internally, I was like rolling my eyes. It was just really hard to deal with. Another experience was when I was in Korea. The social scene for expats is very limited, especially for things that are kind of off the grid. So over the years, I had trouble finding other people that were interested in the things that I'm interested in. One day, this group popped up in the expat Facebook feed, esoteric discussion, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. I'm going to go to that. So I go, and there's this guy and like two other people and me. He was just completely into himself. He had no interest in discussion. It was like a 55-minute meeting of just him talking about himself and other people trying to interject, but him sort of steamrolling them. And typically in those situations, I'm quite quiet because I want to assess the dynamic before I actually get too involved. So I was just kind of sitting there watching him and wondering like, what is up with this guy? He claimed that he was a Freemason. He also claimed that he was more enlightened than the rest of us. which actually pissed me off a little bit. He was just this sort of nerdy guy that had a high view of himself that was much higher than the reality, I think. So I just went that one time and I never went back. But I would say like one of the most guru moments I've ever seen was in Thailand. I was at a fasting retreat, an 11-day fasting retreat. And if you've been to Thailand, you know there's a lot of these kind of pseudo-mystical guru guys walking around. So they're kind of a dime a dozen out there. But I was on this island and I was doing this retreat. The place that I was doing it at had this restaurant. And so we could get like coconut water and stuff. That was one thing that was allowed on the fasting. Coconut water. I was at the restaurant getting a coconut water and I made friends with these two women that were also fasting. We kind of were, in the struggle together and we bonded quite quickly. And so this guy came from the meditation compound down the street. And apparently he is a vegetarian and he comes to this restaurant. I think he might have been a vegan, I'm not sure. But he comes to this restaurant for lunch. So we run into him. The first thing I'm gonna say is that he's wearing a Speedo and that's like all he's wearing. It's actually one of the reasons why I decided to do this video, because when I was watching this Holy Hell film, the guy walks around in a Speedo like all the time. And it totally reminded me of this guy. You can probably imagine him, he's wearing a Speedo. He's ripped, I will say that, because he does yoga all the time. He's got like long hair and like a ponytail and a beard. He comes in there. At first he's, starting to be, what do you guys, why are you doing this? Is it, some kind of spiritual thing? Blah, blah, blah. He's asking the girls mostly all these questions. He doesn't really care about me. On and on, he's like digging deeper. And as he's digging deeper, I'm realizing that he's coming on to these women. Oh, you should come down to the meditation. We could do some yoga. I can help you stretch, like all this stuff. And I was just like, oh my God. Like, I get it. Men like to come on to women. Even if they're enlightened, they like to do that. A lot of the gurus, when you see on documentaries and stuff, they're horn dogs. So I totally get it. It's just funny to see when you're like, there. Like, I'm usually quite silent when I'm in group situations, but sometimes, back when I used to drink, I would get a little mouthy, especially when people would do stupid things or like things that I thought were kind of ridiculous. And even if I'm not drinking, I still kind of will do that if I really see something that's heavy-handed, and I'll kind of call it out. I just kind of called the guy out and he was not happy. And I don't know. Maybe it was because I was fasting and my head was not quite, on right. But I'm like, why do you have to be so snaky about it? Just like say, hey, let's go on a date, or, like he was so manipulative about the way he was trying to get them to come to his little compound, It was kind of sickening to see. With all that said, I've known two true mystics in my life, in my 52 years in this realm. One I knew very well, and one I met a single time. When I say that, I've met, lots of monks in Asia, and I'm not going to count them exactly because I feel like it's a different situation. I've met priests, I've met people that you could classify as a mystic, but I'm not really talking about that kind of thing here. This is more of like either gurus or like off the track mystics. So the person I knew, I would say, if you know D&D, he was chaotic neutral. The other guy was probably lawful evil, the one that I met one time. The one that I knew well was a Thalamite. If you don't know what Thalamite is, it's a follower of the religion Thelema. If you know anything about that religion, it's a certain kind of vibe. And I knew him quite well, so much so that I wrote a book about my experience with him. I co-wrote this book with my other friend who also had a similar experience with him. The link is above if you're interested in that kind of thing. He was the real deal. I wrote a whole book about it, so it just shows how much of an impact he had on me. But he was definitely the real deal. Now, there are questions about his personality or, his weaknesses, things like that. He's a human being like anybody. When you talked to him, you knew you were talking to someone that knew, that had gnosis, using the Gnostic term. He had a way of being just there, very present, and just knowing what question to ask you at the right time to get you to kind of go off on your own journey. I think that's the difference. With the guru, like I said, it's, you can't reach enlightenment without them. Whereas in the case of this mystic, he wasn't showing you the way. He was showing you how you could find it yourself. And I think that's a big difference. So the other guy I met one time at a street festival, and he actually knew the mystic that I knew. And he actually kind of looked up to him a little bit, which was interesting. But this guy was clad all in black. His shirt was open to his belly. He was wearing like a suit coat, all in black. He had a woman on each, each arm. Like, he was definitely like a presence. Like, when you saw him, you're like, wow, who's that guy? And you could tell that he went really deep inside. But I would say more in the left-hand path. You can kind of feel the negative energy coming off of him. It was very tangible. I mention him in this book also, briefly. My friend and I do. And because my friend also met him. I didn't even hardly talk to him. I only talked to him a little bit. But I knew. I knew immediately. I'm like, this guy is the real deal. Now, I wouldn't say in a positive way. I'd say more in a negative way. But he was definitely a true mystic. You could see it. Yeah, I guess the point of this video is to say that there are real ones out there. There are not many. If I was to compare the gurus to the true mystics, the percent, it would probably be like 95% guru, 5% mystic or something. Quite low percentage. If you are struggling and you're looking for a mystic, most likely they will find you. Don't give up hope, because they do exist. They're just not easy to find. They're kind of like a unicorn, I guess. But that's all I got for this one. Take care. Have a good day.